My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 months ago I was standing in the marble foyer of my childhood home, watching my stepmother Patricia pack the last of my late father's belongings into boxes marked Goodwill. She didn't know I was there. She didn't know about the hidden cameras I'd installed. And she definitely didn't know that I'd just transferred $2.3 million back into my own accounts. Money she thought she'd stolen from me forever. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story, this beautiful, devastating story of betrayal and justice, it needs to be told properly. If you're watching this, drop a comment about where you're watching from and hit subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. See, for 32 years I believed in family. I believed that blood meant something, that the people who raised you would never deliberately hurt you. I believed that love was unconditional and that good people always won in the end. I was wrong about almost everything. The woman who destroyed my family wasn't some stranger who seduced my father. She was Patricia Whitmore, the family friend who brought casseroles when my mother was dying of cancer. The same woman who held my hand at Mom's funeral and promised she'd always be there for me. The same woman who married my father 6 months later and spent the next 8 years systematically isolating him from everyone who truly loved him. But here's the thing about revenge. It's not about anger. It's about justice. And sometimes, justice wears designer heels and carries a briefcase full of evidence that will destroy your enemies so completely they'll never recover. So grab some popcorn, because this is the story of how I took down the woman who tried to steal my life, and why she's now living in a studio apartment in Newark while I'm sitting in the penthouse she thought would be hers forever. Let me paint you a picture of who I used to be, because understanding that person is crucial to understanding how I became who I am today. I was the good daughter, the responsible one. While other kids were partying in college, I was getting my MBA in finance and working part-time to help with Mom's medical bills. When she got sick, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed on a Tuesday that split my life into before and after, I moved back home to help Dad take care of her. Mom fought for 2 years. 2 years of chemo, radiation, experimental treatments that cost more than most people's houses. Dad would sit by her bedside every night, holding her hand, reading her favorite books aloud, even when she was too weak to respond. They'd been married 26 years, and watching them together during those final months taught me what real love looked like. That's when Patricia entered our lives. She was a widow herself, having lost her husband to a heart attack 3 years earlier. She lived 2 streets over in our upscale neighborhood in Westchester County, and she seemed to appear whenever we needed help. She'd bring dinner when I was too exhausted to cook. She'd sit with Mom when Dad needed to run errands. She'd drive me to the hospital when my car was in the shop. "She's an angel," Mom whispered to me one evening, about a month before she died. "Promise me you'll look after your father when I'm gone. And promise me you'll be kind to Patricia. She's been such a blessing to our family." I promised. God help me, I promised. Mom died on a Sunday morning in March, with Dad holding one hand and me holding the other. The funeral was beautiful. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Mom had been a beloved high school English teacher for 30 years, and her former students filled the church with stories and flowers. Patricia was there, of course. She sat in the front row with us, dabbing her eyes with tissues and squeezing Dad's shoulder during the eulogy. At the reception afterward, she helped serve food and clean up, staying until the last guest had gone home. "I don't know what we would have done without you," Dad told her that night, and I nodded in agreement. I was 24, drowning in grief and grateful for any kindness. The first red flag should have been how quickly things moved after that. Within 2 weeks, Patricia was at our house every day. She'd arrive in the morning with coffee and pastries, stay for lunch, and often didn't leave until after dinner. She reorganized Mom's closet to help with the healing process. She redecorated the living room because Richard needs a fresh start. She threw away Mom's favorite coffee mug because it's too painful to keep these reminders around. I was living in the city then, working as a junior analyst at Goldman Sachs and trying to build my career. I'd drive up to Westchester every weekend to check on Dad, and each time I visited, more of Mom's presence had been erased. Her books disappeared from the shelves. Her photos were replaced with generic art. Even her garden, the roses she'd tended for 15 years, was torn up and replanted with Patricia's preferred hydrangeas. "Dad," I said one Saturday in May, Don't you think this is all happening a little fast? He was sitting in his study, looking older than his 58 years. The life insurance payout from Mom's policy had covered most of the medical bills, but the emotional toll was written in every line on his face. "Patricia's been wonderful, Sarah," he said quietly. "She's helping me move forward. Your mother would want that. But Mom's only been gone 2 months. Maybe you should take some time to—" "I'm not getting any younger," he interrupted, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before, a defensiveness that felt foreign. "Patricia understands what I'm going through. She's been where I am." The engagement was announced in July, 4 months after Mom's death. I tried to be supportive, I really did. I told myself that grief affects everyone differently, that Dad deserved happiness, that Patricia had genuinely cared for our family during the worst time of our lives. When they asked me to be the maid of honor at their small ceremony in September, I said yes. The wedding was nothing like the celebration Dad and Mom had renewed their vows with on their 20th anniversary. This was a quiet affair at the country club, with maybe 30 guests. Patricia wore cream instead of white, out of respect for your mother's memory, she told me. And Dad looked uncomfortable in his new suit. But it was during the reception that I got my first real glimpse of who Patricia truly was. I was in the bathroom when I overheard her talking to her sister Margaret in the hallway outside. "Well, that's done," Patricia said, her voice carrying that satisfied tone people use when they've completed an unpleasant task. "The house is worth at least $1.2 million, and Richard's 401k is substantial. Plus, there's the life insurance money he hasn't touched yet." "What about the daughter?" Margaret asked. "Sarah? She's so busy with her little career in the city she barely pays attention to what's happening up here. Besides, Richard's already talking about updating his will. I'll be the primary beneficiary within the year." My blood turned to ice. I stood frozen in that bathroom stall, listening to my new stepmother discuss my father like he was a business acquisition. "And if she becomes a problem?" Margaret pressed. Patricia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Please. She's a sweet girl, but she's naive. She actually thanked me for taking such good care of Daddy. She has no idea what's coming." I waited until they left before emerging from the bathroom. My hands were shaking as I splashed cold water on my face, trying to process what I'd just heard. Part of me wanted to march straight to Dad and tell him everything. But another part, the part that had been trained to be polite, to avoid conflict, to trust that adults knew what they were doing, convinced me I must have misunderstood. Maybe Patricia was just being practical. Maybe she was worried about financial security. Maybe I was being paranoid because I missed Mom so much. I decided to watch and wait. That was my first mistake. The next 2 years passed in a blur of small betrayals that I kept explaining away. Dad stopped calling me as often. When I visited, Patricia would monopolize the conversation, steering it away from memories of Mom or my work achievements toward topics that made me feel excluded. Their new friends at the country club, their vacation plans, their shared interests that somehow never included me. She had a talent for making cutting remarks disguised as concern. "Sarah, honey, you're looking thin. Are you eating enough? I worry about you living alone in that expensive city." Or, "Your father and I were just saying how we hope you'll find someone soon. You're not getting any younger, and we'd love grandchildren before we're too old to enjoy them." Dad would nod along, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. The man who had once been my biggest cheerleader, who had driven 3 hours to attend my college graduation, who had called me every Sunday just to hear about my week, was becoming a stranger. The financial manipulation started subtly. Patricia convinced Dad to add her name to all his accounts for convenience. She took over managing the household finances because Richard works so hard he shouldn't have to worry about bills. She suggested they get a joint credit card for shared expenses. When I expressed concern during one of my visits, Dad brushed me off. "Patricia has a background in bookkeeping," he said. "She's much better with money than I am. Your mother always handled our finances, and after she died, I was completely lost. Patricia's been a godsend." It was true that Mom had managed their money, but Dad wasn't incompetent. He was a successful architect who had built a thriving firm over 25 years. The idea that he couldn't handle his own checking account was absurd. But Patricia had convinced him otherwise. The real wake-up call came during Christmas of their 2nd year of marriage. I arrived at the house on Christmas Eve to find it transformed yet again. Gone were the family photos that had lined the mantelpiece for decades. Gone were the handmade ornaments Mom and I had collected over the years. Even the Christmas stockings had been replaced. Instead of the needlepoint ones Mom had made with our names, there were generic red velvet ones from Pottery Barn. "Where are our old decorations?" I asked Patricia as she bustled around the kitchen, preparing dinner for her relatives who were joining us. "Oh, those old things?" She waved dismissively. "They were so worn out, honey. I donated them to charity. These new ones are much more elegant, don't you think?" I felt like I'd been slapped. Those decorations weren't just objects. They were memories. The angel Mom had bought during their honeymoon in Italy, the handprint ornaments I'd made in elementary school, the photo ornament from my high school graduation. "You donated them?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Without asking?" "Sarah, sweetie, you don't even live here anymore. I didn't think you'd mind. Besides, your father and I are building new traditions now." Dad was in the living room, pretending to read the newspaper, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He'd heard the conversation, but he said nothing. That night, after Patricia's relatives had gone home and she'd gone to bed, I found Dad sitting alone in his study. "Dad, can we talk?" He looked up from his laptop, and for a moment I saw a flash of the man I remembered. Tired, sad, but still my father. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "I miss Mom," I said simply. "And I feel like she's being erased from this house, from our family." His face crumpled slightly. "I miss her too, Sarah. Every day." "Then why are you letting Patricia throw away everything that reminds us of her?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because it hurts too much to remember. When I see her things, her pictures, I can barely breathe. Patricia helps me focus on the future instead of the past." "But forgetting isn't healing, Dad. Mom wouldn't want us to pretend she never existed." "I'm not pretending that." His voice sharpened, and I recognized Patricia's influence in his tone. "But I can't live in a museum, Sarah. I have to move on." "Moving on doesn't mean erasing her." "Patricia thinks—" "What do you think, Dad?" I interrupted. "Not Patricia. You." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt, maybe, or recognition. But then it was gone. "I think you should respect my choices," he said finally. "I'm happy with Patricia. She takes good care of me." That conversation haunted me for months. I started paying closer attention during my visits, documenting the changes I noticed. Patricia had convinced Dad to switch financial advisors to someone she recommended. She'd talked him into refinancing the house, adding her name to the deed. She'd even convinced him to close the college fund he'd been contributing to for my future children. Why save for hypothetical grandchildren when we could be enjoying life now? But the final straw came in March, almost exactly 3 years after Mom's death. Dad had a heart attack. I got the call at 2 a.m. from Patricia, her voice shaking with what sounded like genuine panic. "Sarah, you need to come to the hospital right away. Your father, he collapsed at dinner. They're saying it was a massive heart attack." I drove through the night, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Dad was only 61. He was supposed to have decades left. We were supposed to have time to repair our relationship, to find our way back to each other. I arrived at Mount Sinai to find Patricia in the waiting room, surrounded by her relatives. She was crying, accepting comfort from her sister Margaret, playing the role of the devastated wife perfectly. "How is he?" I asked, still in my pajamas and sneakers. "Critical," she said, dabbing her eyes. "The doctors aren't sure if he's going to make it through the night." I spent the next 18 hours in that waiting room, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. Dad pulled through the surgery, but the damage to his heart was extensive. The doctors said he'd need months of recovery, and even then, his quality of life would be significantly impacted. For the first week, I barely left his bedside. I took emergency leave from work, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair, holding his hand when he was awake and talking to him when he wasn't. Patricia would visit during the day, but she always had somewhere else to be. Appointments, errands, obligations that seemed to multiply whenever Dad needed care. It was during his second week in the hospital that I overheard the conversation that changed everything. I'd gone to the cafeteria to grab coffee, And when I returned to Dad's room, I heard voices inside. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see Patricia standing by his bed, talking on her phone. "No, Margaret, he's not going to recover fully," she was saying, her voice clinical and cold. "The doctors were very clear about that. He'll need constant care, probably for the rest of his life." There was a pause as she listened to her sister's response. "Of course I've thought about that," Patricia continued. "The house is in both our names now, and I'm the primary beneficiary on all his accounts. If something happens to him, I'll be set for life. But if he lingers like this for years—" Another pause. "Well, there are facilities for people in his condition. Nice ones, but expensive. It might be the most humane option, really. He wouldn't want to be a burden." My coffee cup slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor and splattering hot liquid everywhere. Patricia spun around, her face going pale when she saw me standing in the doorway. "Sarah, I didn't hear you come back." "Clearly." My voice was steady, but inside I was screaming. "Were you just discussing putting my father in a nursing home while he's unconscious in his hospital bed?" We were just discussing options. In case. She tried to look flustered, concerned, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. "In case what? In case he becomes inconvenient for you?" "That's not fair, Sarah. I love your father, but we have to be realistic about his prognosis. He's been in the hospital for 2 weeks, Patricia. 2 weeks. And you're already planning to warehouse him somewhere so you can get on with your life. I'm trying to think about what's best for everyone." "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "You're thinking about what's best for you, just like you have been since the day you married him." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the good daughter, the polite stepdaughter, the naive girl who trusted that adults had everyone's best interests at heart. It was time to find out exactly what Patricia had been doing with my father's life, his money, and his trust. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove straight to Dad's house. Patricia was at the hospital, or so she claimed, which gave me the opportunity I needed. I still had my key from childhood, though I suspected it wouldn't work much longer given Patricia's pattern of changing everything to suit her needs. The house felt like a mausoleum as I walked through it, but not in the way it had after Mom died. Then it had been heavy with grief, but still warm with memories. Now it felt cold, sterile, like a showroom rather than a home where people had lived and loved for decades. I started in Dad's study, the one room Patricia had left relatively untouched, probably because she didn't understand the value of what was in there. Dad had always been meticulous about record-keeping, a habit that served him well in his architecture business and, I hoped, would serve me well now. What I found in his filing cabinets made my blood run cold. The financial documents told a story of systematic manipulation that was breathtaking in its scope. Over the past 3 years, Patricia had convinced Dad to make a series of investments and improvements that had drained nearly $400,000 from his retirement accounts. A kitchen renovation that cost $80,000, triple what it should have. A business opportunity with one of Patricia's friends that had mysteriously dissolved after Dad's $50,000 investment. A series of emergency loans to Patricia's relatives that were never repaid. But the real bombshell was in a folder marked estate planning. Dad's original will, written shortly after Mom's diagnosis, left everything to me, with Patricia receiving a modest $100,000 bequest and the right to live in the house until her death. It was generous but reasonable. Dad had worked his entire life to build his wealth, and he wanted to ensure his daughter's future. The new will, dated just 6 months ago, told a different story entirely. Patricia was now the primary beneficiary of everything. The house, the retirement accounts, the life insurance policies, even Dad's share of his architecture firm. I was left with $50,000 and some personal items of sentimental value only. My hands were shaking as I photographed every document with my phone, but I needed more than financial records. I needed proof of Patricia's true intentions, her real character, evidence that would hold up if this ever went to court. That's when I remembered something from my finance training. People who commit financial fraud rarely limit themselves to one victim. If Patricia was this calculating with Dad, she'd probably done it before. I spent the next 3 days conducting what I called Operation Background Check. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Detective Rosa Martinez, who specialized in financial crimes. I also reached out to my college roommate Jenny, who now worked as a forensic accountant for the FBI. "Sarah," Jenny said when I called her, "what you're describing sounds like textbook elder financial abuse. But proving it can be tricky, especially if your father willingly signed documents. What if he was coerced? What if she isolated him from people who might have questioned these decisions? That's harder to prove, but not impossible. You'd need evidence of the manipulation, recordings, witnesses, documentation of the isolation tactics. What about her background, if she's done this before? Now that's interesting. Give me her full name, date of birth if you have it, and any previous addresses. Let me see what I can find. While Jenny worked her magic with databases I didn't have access to, Detective Martinez began surveillance on Patricia. I wanted to know where she went when she claimed to be running errands, who she talked to, what her daily routine actually looked like. The results were illuminating. Patricia wasn't spending her days at Dad's bedside as she claimed. Instead, she was meeting with a real estate agent, looking at condos in Florida. She was visiting a luxury car dealership, test driving BMWs and Mercedes. She was having long lunches with her sister Margaret, during which they pored over travel brochures and jewelry catalogs. But the most damning evidence came from Jenny's background check. "Sarah, you need to sit down for this," Jenny said when she called me back 3 days later. "Patricia Whitmore has been married 4 times. Not once, like she told your family. 4 times? Husband number 1 died in a car accident in 1995. She inherited his house and life insurance. Husband number 2 died of a heart attack in 2003. That's the one she told you about. But there was also husband number 3, who died of complications from diabetes in 2010, and husband number 4, who died of a stroke in 2015. My mouth went dry. 4 dead husbands? All natural causes, all well documented. But here's the interesting part. In each case, Patricia inherited substantial assets. We're talking about a pattern of marrying older, financially stable men who died within a few years of the marriage. That can't be a coincidence. Probably not. But here's what's really interesting. I found records of civil suits filed against her by the children of husbands 2 and 4. Both cases alleged financial manipulation and elder abuse. Both were settled out of court with sealed records. So she's done this before, multiple times. And Sarah? In both cases where suits were filed, the children reported the same pattern you're describing. Isolation from family, rapid changes to wills and financial arrangements, and suspicious financial transactions in the months before the husband's death. I felt sick. Dad wasn't Patricia's husband. He was her mark. And if the pattern held, he was in more danger than just financial ruin. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the evidence I'd gathered. Financial documents, surveillance photos, background reports. It painted a clear picture of a woman who had made a career out of preying on grieving widowers. But I still needed more. I needed something that would be undeniable, something that would wake Dad up to what was happening before it was too late. That's when I decided to install the cameras. I called my tech-savvy cousin Mike, who worked in IT security. "I need to set up a surveillance system in Dad's house," I told him. "Something discreet that can record audio and video." "Sarah, that could be illegal depending on how you use it." "Mike, I think Patricia is planning to kill my father." There was a long silence. Jesus. "Okay, but we do this smart. Hidden cameras in common areas only. Living room, kitchen, Dad's study. Nowhere private like bedrooms or bathrooms. And you can't use anything recorded without his consent unless it shows evidence of a crime in progress." "I understand." We installed the system the next day while Patricia was at the hospital. Tiny cameras hidden in picture frames, smoke detectors, and decorative objects. The feeds went directly to an app on my phone, and everything was stored in cloud storage with timestamps. I also made another decision that day. I was moving back home. "I'm taking a leave of absence from work," I told Patricia when I arrived at the hospital that evening. "I want to help take care of Dad during his recovery." Her face went through a series of micro-expressions. Surprise, annoyance, calculation, before settling on a mask of gratitude. "Oh, Sarah, that's so thoughtful of you. But you don't need to sacrifice your career. I can handle everything." "I'm sure you can," I said smoothly, "but I want to be here. Family is more important than work." Dad was awake and alert that day, the best he'd been since the heart attack. When I told him I was taking time off to help with his recovery, his eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to do that, sweetheart," he said, his voice still weak but clearer than it had been. "I want to, Dad. We're family. We take care of each other." I saw him glance at Patricia, who was standing by the window with her arms crossed. Something passed between them, a look I couldn't quite interpret. "That would be wonderful," he said finally. "I've missed having you around." Patricia's smile looked like it was carved from ice. Dad came home from the hospital on a Tuesday in April, exactly 1 month after his heart attack. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic about his recovery, but he would need months of physical therapy and careful monitoring. Most importantly, he would need a calm, stress-free environment to heal. Patricia had other plans. Within hours of Dad's return, the cameras I'd installed began capturing a side of my stepmother that she'd never shown when others were around. The sweet, caring wife disappeared the moment she thought no one was watching. "Richard, you need to sign these papers," I heard her say on the first night, her voice sharp with impatience. Dad was barely settled in his own bed, still weak from the hospital stay. "What papers?" His voice was tired, confused. "Insurance forms. Medical directives. Just routine stuff the hospital needs." I was in the kitchen, supposedly making tea, but I could see everything through the camera feed on my phone. Patricia was holding a stack of documents, but from the angle I could see they weren't insurance forms. They looked like legal documents, the kind that required notarization. "Can we do this tomorrow?" Dad asked. "I'm exhausted." "It'll just take a minute, honey. Sign here, and initial there." I watched my father, barely conscious, scrawl his signature on documents he hadn't read, documents that Patricia quickly tucked away in her purse. The next morning, while Patricia was out running errands, I confronted Dad. "Dad, what did you sign last night?" He looked confused. "Sign? I don't remember signing anything." "Patricia had you sign some papers. She said they were insurance forms." "Oh, right, yes, something about the hospital bills." He rubbed his forehead, still clearly struggling with fatigue and medication side effects. "Did you read them?" "Patricia said they were just routine." "Why? Is something wrong?" I wanted to tell him everything right then. About the cameras, about Patricia's history, about the financial manipulation I'd discovered. But he was so fragile, so dependent on her for his daily care. The shock might literally kill him. Instead, I said, "I just want to make sure you're not signing anything important without understanding it first. Sarah, honey, I appreciate your concern, but Patricia handles all the paperwork now. She's much better at that stuff than I am." The pattern continued over the next 2 weeks. Patricia would wait until I was out of the room, then pressure Dad to sign documents, make phone calls, or agree to financial decisions while he was medicated and confused. The cameras captured it all. But the most damning footage came on a Thursday evening when Patricia thought Dad was asleep. I was upstairs in my old bedroom when I got an alert on my phone. Motion detected in Dad's study. I opened the app to see Patricia at Dad's computer, typing rapidly. She had a stack of papers beside her and was clearly copying information from his files. I crept downstairs and positioned myself where I could hear but not be seen. Patricia was on the phone, her voice low but clear enough for the cameras to pick up. "Yes, I understand the timeline," she was saying, "but Richard's recovery is taking longer than expected. He's getting stronger and his daughter is here now, asking questions." There was a pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end. "No, I can't speed things up. It has to look natural. But I've got him signing everything I need. The new power of attorney went through yesterday, and the updated beneficiary forms for his life insurance should be processed by next week." Another pause. "Margaret, I know you're worried, but I've done this before. The key is patience. Richard trusts me completely, and Sarah still thinks I'm just a grieving widow who fell in love with her father. She has no idea what's coming." My blood turned to ice as I realized what I was hearing. Patricia wasn't just stealing from Dad. She was planning something much worse. "The beauty of his condition is that another heart attack wouldn't surprise anyone," Patricia continued. "The stress of recovery, the medications, his age, it's almost expected. And when it happens, I'll be the devastated widow who tried so hard to save him." I had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. She was planning to murder my father. "I just need to be careful about the timing," Patricia said. "Too soon after the first heart attack and people might ask questions. But if I wait too long, he might get strong enough to start thinking clearly again, and we can't have that. I backed away from the study as quietly as I could, my heart pounding so hard I was sure Patricia would hear it. I made it to the kitchen before my legs gave out and I had to sit down at the table to keep from collapsing. My stepmother was planning to kill my father for his money. And she'd done it before, 4 times. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Detective Martinez. "I need you to come to the house right now," I whispered, "and bring backup. I have evidence of a planned murder." While I waited for the detective to arrive, I made copies of all the camera footage and uploaded everything to a secure cloud server. If something happened to me, I wanted to make sure the evidence would survive. 20 minutes later, Detective Martinez arrived with 2 uniformed officers. I met them at the door and quickly explained what I'd discovered. "We need to be careful," Martinez said. "If she realizes we're onto her, she might accelerate her timeline. Is your father safe right now?" "He's sleeping upstairs. Patricia's in his study, probably destroying evidence." "Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to go upstairs and stay with your father. Don't let Patricia near him, no matter what excuse she gives. We're going to execute a search warrant and arrest her before she can hurt anyone." But as we spoke, we heard the front door slam. Through the window, I could see Patricia's car pulling out of the driveway. "She's running," I said. Martinez was already on her radio, calling in Patricia's license plate and description. "Don't worry," she told me. "She won't get far. And with the evidence you've gathered, she's going away for a very long time." I ran upstairs to check on Dad, my heart still racing. He was awake, looking confused by all the commotion. "Sarah? What's happening? Where's Patricia?" I sat down on the edge of his bed and took his hand. "Dad, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear." Over the next hour, I told him everything. About Patricia's history, about the financial manipulation, about the conversation I'd overheard at their wedding, about the cameras and what they'd recorded. I showed him the evidence on my phone, the footage of her pressuring him to sign documents, the audio of her planning his murder. Dad's face went through a range of emotions: disbelief, horror, anger, and finally, a deep sadness that broke my heart. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I was so lonely after your mother died, and Patricia seemed like such a blessing. I thought she loved me." "She's a predator, Dad. She's very good at what she does. This isn't your fault. But I pushed you away. I chose her over you, over your mother's memory. How can you ever forgive me?" I squeezed his hand. "Because you're my father, and I love you. And because we're going to get through this together." Detective Martinez appeared in the doorway. "We got her," she announced. Patricia Whitmore was arrested at the airport trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. She had $50,000 in cash and a fake passport. The trial of Patricia Whitmore became a media sensation. The prosecution, armed with my surveillance footage and Detective Martinez's investigation, painted a picture of a serial predator who had spent decades targeting vulnerable widowers. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, recorded conversations, testimony from the families of her previous victims. Patricia's defense team tried to argue that she genuinely loved my father and that the recorded conversations were taken out of context. But when the prosecution played the audio of her discussing the best way to cause another heart attack, the jury's faces said everything. She was convicted on charges of attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 25 years to life, noting that her calculated cruelty and complete lack of remorse warranted the maximum penalty. But the legal victory was only part of the story. The real work began after Patricia's arrest, when Dad and I had to rebuild our relationship and our lives. The financial damage was extensive. Patricia had stolen or wasted nearly $800,000 of Dad's retirement savings. But with the help of forensic accountants and civil litigation, we were able to recover most of it from accounts she'd hidden in various names. More importantly, we recovered each other. Dad's physical recovery was slow but steady. The stress of learning about Patricia's betrayal actually seemed to motivate him to get stronger, as if he was determined to prove that she hadn't succeeded in destroying him. We spent hours talking about Mom, about the years we'd lost, about the future we wanted to build together. "I keep thinking about what your mother would say about all this," Dad said one evening as we sat in his study, going through the boxes of Mom's belongings that Patricia had claimed to donate but had actually hidden in the basement. We'd found them during the police search, along with several other donated items that Patricia had planned to sell. She'd probably say, "I told you so," I replied, carefully unwrapping Mom's favorite coffee mug, the one Patricia had thrown away but apparently kept for some reason. Remember how she always said she could spot a fake person from a mile away? Dad laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in years. She never liked Patricia, did she? Even when Patricia was helping during the cancer treatments. No, she didn't. She told me once that Patricia's kindness felt performative, like she was auditioning for a role rather than genuinely caring. "Your mother was always the smart one in our marriage," Dad said softly. "I should have listened to her instincts." We found other treasures in those boxes. Photo albums Patricia had hidden, Mom's jewelry that was supposed to be mine, even the handmade Christmas ornaments I thought were gone forever. It was like getting pieces of our family history back from the dead. The house transformation took months. We repainted the walls back to the warm colors Mom had chosen. We replanted her rose garden. We put her photos back on the mantelpiece and her books back on the shelves. It wasn't about living in the past. It was about honoring the love that had built our family in the first place. Dad's architecture firm, which had suffered during his illness and Patricia's interference, began to recover as well. His business partner, Tom, had been fielding calls from concerned clients who'd heard about the arrest. The whole industry was talking about it, Tom told us over dinner one night. "Everyone was shocked, but also impressed by how you handled it, Sarah. Word got out that you'd basically conducted your own investigation and brought down a serial killer." That reputation led to an unexpected opportunity. A law firm specializing in elder abuse cases offered me a position as a financial crimes investigator. The work would combine my finance background with the investigative skills I'd developed during the Patricia situation. "You'd be helping other families who are going through what you went through," the senior partner explained during my interview. "There are more predators like Patricia out there than most people realize." I took the job, and it became my calling. Over the next 2 years, I helped expose dozens of cases of elder financial abuse. Each victory felt like justice not just for those families, but for Dad, for Mom's memory, and for everyone Patricia had hurt over the years. The media attention from Patricia's trial also led to something I hadn't expected: a book deal. Publishers were fascinated by the story of how a daughter had taken down her stepmother's murder plot using hidden cameras and financial forensics. The Last Laugh: How I Exposed My Stepmother's Deadly Scheme became a bestseller, with all proceeds going to organizations that help elder abuse victims. The book tour was surreal, appearing on talk shows, speaking at conferences, sharing our story with audiences who couldn't believe someone could be so calculating and cruel. But the most satisfying moment came exactly 1 year after Patricia's arrest. Dad and I were having dinner at our favorite restaurant, the same place he and Mom used to go for their anniversary, when his phone buzzed with a news alert. "Patricia's appeal was denied," he said, showing me the screen. "The conviction stands." We raised our glasses of wine in a quiet toast, not to revenge, but to justice, to survival, to the family we'd rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. "You know what the best part is?" I said as we walked to the car afterward. "What's that?" She thought she was so smart, so careful. She thought she'd found the perfect mark in you, a grieving widower with money and a daughter who lived far away and didn't pay attention. And she had no idea that the daughter she dismissed as naive and unimportant would be the one to bring her down. She underestimated me completely. Dad smiled, the kind of smile I remembered from childhood, proud, loving, genuine. "Your mother always said you were stronger than you knew. I think she would have been proud of how you fought for our family. I think she would have been proud of how we found our way back to each other." 6 months later, Dad met someone new, a widow named Helen who had lost her husband to cancer 3 years earlier. But this time, the introduction came through his grief counseling group, not through mysterious appearances during family crises. Helen was transparent about her finances, patient with Dad's recovery, and genuinely interested in getting to know me as his daughter. Most importantly, she encouraged Dad to talk about Mom, to keep her memory alive, to honor the love they'd shared rather than trying to erase it. "I'm not trying to replace your mother," Helen told me during our first dinner together. "No one could do that. I'm just hoping to add something new to your father's life, not take away from what came before." That's when I knew she was different. Patricia had demanded that Dad forget his past to make room for their future. Helen understood that the past was part of what made Dad who he was. The wedding was small and beautiful, held in Mom's rose garden, with photos of her displayed alongside the flowers. Dad wore his original wedding ring on his right hand, a symbol that his love for Mom would always be part of him. Helen wore her late husband's watch, for the same reason. I was the maid of honor again, but this time it felt like a celebration rather than a funeral. As I write this, it's been 3 years since Patricia's arrest. Dad is healthier and happier than he's been since Mom died. His architecture firm is thriving again. Helen has become not just his wife, but a genuine friend to me. Someone who listens to my stories about Mom without jealousy, who includes me in holiday planning, who treats me like the daughter she never had. Patricia is serving her sentence at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. She's eligible for parole in 2045 when she'll be 78 years old. I've been contacted by the parole board to provide victim impact statements when that time comes, and I'll be ready. But I don't spend much time thinking about her anymore. She was a chapter in our story, a dark, terrible chapter, but she wasn't the ending. The ending is Dad walking me down the aisle at my own wedding last month, healthy and proud and present in a way he hadn't been for years. The ending is Helen helping me plan the baby shower for the grandchild Dad thought he'd never have. The ending is Sunday dinners where we tell stories about Mom and laugh until our sides hurt. The ending is justice served, family restored, and love winning over greed. Family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about the people who show up when life gets hard, who celebrate your victories and mourn your losses, who love you enough to fight for you even when you can't fight for yourself. Patricia thought she could destroy our family for money. Instead, she taught us what family really means, and in the end, we got the last laugh. 1 year later, a notification popped up on my phone as I was feeding my 3-month-old daughter, Emma Rose, named after my mother. It was from the prison system. Inmate Patricia Whitmore has requested to add you to her approved visitor list. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some stories don't need an epilogue. Some people don't deserve a second of your time, even for closure. I looked down at Emma, who had Mom's eyes and Dad's stubborn chin, and smiled. This was my focus now, building something beautiful from the ashes of what Patricia had tried to destroy. The last laugh, indeed. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because sometimes the best revenge is living well, and I plan to document every moment of it.